She adopted the ugliest cat. Then he saved her life. The fluorescent lights in the Pacific Northwest Animal Shelter hummed with a steady, clinical buzz that made Eudora Hale's temples ache. She had been walking these narrow corridors for 40 minutes, past cages of sleek tabbies with golden eyes, past playful calicos that batted at her fingers through the bars, past dignified Maine Coons that sat like royalty on their cushions. Each time she paused, the volunteer behind her would launch into a well-rehearsed speech about temperament and adoption fees, but something kept pulling Eudora forward, down to the last row where the overhead light flickered and the smell of cheap disinfectant grew stronger. That's where she found Orville. He sat in the corner of the smallest cage, a grey and white cat with a face that told stories nobody wanted to hear. His left ear was crumpled like forgotten paper, a souvenir from some long-ago fight or accident. One eye held the cloudy film of partial blindness, giving him a perpetually questioning expression. His coat, though clean, was patchy in places where fur had never grown back properly. When Eudora stopped in front of his cage, every other person in the shelter seemed to be giving this particular cat a wide berth. "That's Orville," the volunteer said, her voice dropping to something between pity and apology. "He's been with us for 8 months. Sweet boy, really, but..." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Eudora crouched down, her knees protesting the movement. 63 years of living left its mark on joints and ligaments. She pressed her fingers against the cool metal bars. Orville, unlike every other cat she'd encountered that afternoon, didn't rush forward seeking attention. He didn't meow or rub against the cage. Instead, he tilted his head with that crumpled ear pointing toward the ceiling and studied her with his one good eye and one cloudy one, as if weighing whether she was worth the effort of hope. Then, slowly, deliberately, he stood and walked to the front of the cage. He pressed his scarred forehead against Eudora's wool sleeve through the bars, testing the firmness of this potential shelter against the wind of a world that had been unkind to him. Something in Eudora's chest cracked open. "I'll take him," she said. The volunteer's eyebrows shot up. "Are you sure? We have some lovely younger cats, and Orville, well, he has some special needs. The vet thinks he might have a heart murmur, though we'd need more tests to confirm. And with his appearance, some people find..." "I'll take him," Eudora repeated, more firmly this time. "What do I need to do?" The paperwork was extensive. The shelter had rules, clear and uncompromising, designed to protect animals who'd already known too much neglect. Microchip within 24 hours. No exceptions. Return visit in 30 days for a wellness check. The adoption fee included first vaccines, but Eudora would need to keep the proof handy. Her apartment building's HOA required vaccination tags to be visible on all pets in common areas. Then there was the pet rent addendum to her lease, another $45 a month, non-negotiable. The gas company offered a rebate on carbon monoxide detectors for pet owners, something about early warning systems saving animal lives, so she'd need to purchase one and submit the receipt within 60 days. Eudora signed every form, initialed every clause, and listened to every instruction with the kind of attention she used to reserve for her work as a paralegal before retirement. Nothing about this adoption was heroic. It was all bureaucracy and responsibility, and rules designed to ensure that people like her understood the commitment they were making. An hour later, she carried Orville out of the shelter in a cardboard carrier, his weight surprisingly substantial against her chest. Through the ventilation holes, she could see one amber eye watching her steadily, already cataloguing everything about this new chapter of his life. The drive to her apartment building in the coastal town of Astoria took 20 minutes through streets still damp from morning rain. Salt air drifted through the slightly open window, and Eudora wondered if Orville could smell the ocean from inside his carrier. She lived in the Whitmore Arms, a 3-story building 2 blocks from the waterfront, where salt crystals formed on windowsills and the winter wind rattled panes like it was testing their loyalty. Her apartment was on the 2nd floor, Unit 2B, a 1-bedroom with hardwood floors that expanded and contracted with humidity, making the boards creak at unpredictable moments. The building was old enough to have character, but young enough to have been retrofitted with modern heating, a gas system that kept residents comfortable through the long Pacific Northwest winters. Eudora set the carrier down in the middle of her small living room and opened the wire door. Orville didn't bolt out like she'd expected. He emerged slowly, one cautious paw at a time, his damaged ear swiveling to catch every sound. The elevator shaft ran along the wall behind her writing desk, and every few minutes it would emit a mechanical beep as it moved between floors. The wooden floor released tiny creaks as humidity shifted through the boards, and from behind the desk, the gas heater produced a thin, almost imperceptible whistle, a sound Eudora had long since trained herself to ignore. But Orville noticed, his good eye fixed on the heater, and after a moment of stillness, he walked directly to it, sniffed the air around the unit and sat down. Just sat there, as if he were studying the appliance, learning its rhythms. "You're a peculiar one, aren't you?" Eudora murmured. She'd prepared for this day. Following the shelter's checklist and advice from her neighbor, Mrs. Venora, she'd purchased 2 litter boxes, a bag of premium cat food recommended by the veterinarian whose number the shelter had provided, a soft cushioned bed in calming grey, and a set of basic toys, a feather on a stick, a ball with a bell inside, a catnip mouse. She'd also installed low shelves along one wall to give him climbing options, and had propped interior doors partially open to ensure he'd always have an escape route if he felt cornered. But Orville rejected the plush bed entirely. Instead, he investigated the cardboard carrier he'd arrived in, now lying on its side near the heater, and after a thorough inspection, claimed it as his sleeping spot. The carrier sat directly in line with that faint whistling sound, positioning Orville as its unofficial guardian. That first night, Eudora barely slept, not because Orville was noisy or destructive, but because he was vigilant. She woke at 2 in the morning to find him sitting in the narrow hallway between her bedroom and the living room, perfectly still, ears oriented toward every corner of the apartment. When she got up for water at 3:30, he followed at a distance, mapping her route. At 4:15, the building's heating system cycled on with a low rumble, and Orville returned to his post by the heater, studying it like a sentry analyzing potential threats. By morning, Eudora had dark circles under her eyes, but Orville seemed satisfied. He'd completed his first mission, territorial assessment. She called Dr. Lennox's office before 9 and secured an appointment for the following afternoon, the microchip procedure and initial wellness exam that the shelter required. The receptionist was cheerful and efficient, reminding her to bring all adoption paperwork and to expect the visit to take about an hour. "Is your cat adjusting well?" the woman asked. Eudora glanced at Orville, who was currently stretched in a patch of weak morning sunlight near the heater, eyes half closed, but ears still twitching at every sound. "He's adjusting," Eudora said, "in his own way. That's normal. Give him a few weeks to settle in. Cats are resilient creatures." After ending the call, Eudora made herself coffee and toast, settling into her reading chair by the window that overlooked the street. Rain had started again, that soft, persistent drizzle that defined the Pacific Northwest 9 months out of the year. Below, a few neighbors hurried past with umbrellas, and the garbage truck rumbled toward the building's collection area. At exactly 6 in the morning, the truck's hydraulic arm swung up and slammed the dumpster against its compactor, with a sound like a hammer striking an anvil. Eudora barely flinched. She'd lived here for 3 years and had grown accustomed to the weekly rhythm, but Orville shot under the couch so fast she almost didn't see him move. "It's okay," she said softly, bending to peer into the shadows. "It's just the garbage truck. It comes every Thursday." 2 amber eyes stared back at her from the darkness, pupils blown wide. It took Orville 20 minutes to emerge, and when he did, he went directly to his cardboard carrier, circled 3 times, and curled into the tightest ball Eudora had ever seen a cat manage. His tail wrapped around his body like a shield, and his breathing came in rapid, shallow bursts. How long had he lived with fear? How many sudden noises had preceded bad things in his life before the shelter? Eudora wanted to reach out, to comfort him, but instinct told her that space was what he needed now. So she returned to her chair and her coffee, letting him know through her stillness that this place was safe even when it was loud. By noon, he'd relaxed enough to eat a small amount of food and use the litter box. Progress, Eudora thought. Small victories. What would the coming weeks bring? Would this damaged, watchful cat ever truly relax? Or had the world taught him that vigilance was the only path to survival? Dr. Lennox's veterinary clinic occupied the ground floor of a converted house on Maritime Avenue, its waiting room decorated with faded maritime charts and black and white photographs of Astoria's fishing heritage. Eudora arrived 15 minutes early for their appointment, Orville silent in his carrier, except for the occasional soft breath that fogged the plastic viewing window. The receptionist, a young woman with purple streaks in her dark hair, smiled warmly as she processed Orville's paperwork. "First visit with Dr. Lennox. You're going to love her. She's amazing with nervous animals." "That's good," Eudora said, "because I think nervous might be his default state." "Doctor." Lennox turned out to be a woman in her mid-40s, with capable hands and an unhurried manner that immediately put Eudora at ease. She greeted Orville by letting him smell her fingers through the carrier door before opening it, speaking in a low, calm voice that seemed designed not to startle. "Hello there, handsome boy. Yes, I can see you've had quite a life before this." Orville emerged cautiously onto the examination table, his claws clicking against the stainless steel. "Doctor." Lennox examined him methodically, checking his teeth, palpating his abdomen, listening to his heart and lungs. The microchip procedure took only seconds, and Orville barely flinched. But when Dr. Lennox placed her stethoscope against his chest for the second time, her expression shifted subtly. She listened for a long moment, moved the scope to another position, listened again. "I'm hearing a heart murmur," she said quietly. "Grade 2, maybe grade 3. It's not an emergency, but it's something we need to monitor." As he seemed lethargic, any trouble breathing? Eudora thought about Orville's midnight patrols, his constant state of alert. He doesn't seem lethargic exactly. More like he doesn't stop. He's always watching, always aware. Dr. Lennox nodded. "That's actually not unusual for cats with his history. But with this murmur, we need to avoid overexertion. No long play sessions that get his heart rate too high. Short, frequent mental stimulation instead. Puzzle feeders, gentle interactive play, and make sure he's always hydrated. Cats are notoriously bad at drinking enough water." She handed Eudora a printed information sheet about feline heart murmurs, along with instructions for scheduling a follow-up echocardiogram in 3 months if the murmur persisted. "Can he still have a normal life?" Eudora asked. "Define normal." Dr. Lennox smiled slightly. "He'll need a controlled routine, yes. But cats with managed heart conditions can live many good years. The key is balance. Enough stimulation to keep him engaged, but not so much that we stress his cardiovascular system. Every victory would have a price." Eudora was beginning to understand that principle would govern their life together. Back at the apartment, she implemented Dr. Lennox's recommendations. She purchased a water fountain designed to encourage drinking, installed it in the kitchen, and switched Orville's food to smaller, more frequent meals. She kept play sessions to 5 minutes at a time, just enough to engage him without seeing that telltale rapid breathing that indicated his heart was working too hard. But Orville's primary occupation remained vigilance. He'd mapped the apartment's territory and identified its rhythms: the elevator's mechanical beep, the floor's humidity creaks, the heater's thin whistle. Now, in his second month with Eudora, his objective shifted. He needed to remain visible without succumbing to panic when the building's usual chaos intruded. The first real test came on a Tuesday morning when the building management sent an email announcing a pest control inspection. Every unit would receive treatment for preventative measures against the silverfish and occasional carpenter ants that plagued coastal buildings. The treatment was mandatory, the email emphasized, and residents needed to ensure pets were secured during the 2-hour window when the exterminator would be in their unit. Eudora read the email 3 times, anxiety building in her chest. She looked at Orville, who was currently sitting on the low shelf by the window, watching rain streak down the glass. "We have company coming tomorrow," she told him. "I don't think you're going to like it." She was right. When the exterminator arrived, a burly man in coveralls who smelled strongly of industrial chemicals, Orville disappeared instantly. Eudora heard the closet door in her bedroom bump as he squeezed behind her winter coats. The man worked efficiently, spraying baseboards and corners, setting traps in the kitchen and bathroom, and within 40 minutes, he was gone, leaving behind a chemical odor that made Eudora's eyes water. Orville didn't emerge from the closet for 2 hours. When he finally appeared, moving low to the ground, he went directly to the heater and sat there, staring at it. Then he turned his head and looked at Eudora with such intensity that she felt compelled to get up from her chair and join him. "What is it?" she asked, crouching beside him. "What are you trying to tell me?" He touched his paw to the baseboard near the heater, then looked at her again. It was such a deliberate gesture that Eudora felt a chill despite the warmth of the room. Was he reacting to the exterminator's spray? Or was he trying to communicate something else? She made a mental note to watch him more carefully, to pay attention to what he was paying attention to. The HOA added another layer of complexity that week. Mrs. Chen, the building manager, knocked on Eudora's door on Thursday afternoon with a clipboard and a professional smile. "Just need to see the vaccination tag for the common areas," she said pleasantly. "It's in all the leases, but we're doing a building-wide verification this month." Eudora retrieved the paperwork from Dr. Lennox, showing both the rabies vaccination certificate and the small metal tag she'd attached to Orville's collar, a collar he tolerated but clearly disliked, scratching at it periodically throughout the day. Mrs. Chen checked a box on her form. "Perfect. And I'll need a photo of him wearing it for the building records." "A photo?" "Yes. It's the new policy. Just email it to the office by next Friday." After Mrs. Chen left, Eudora spent 20 minutes trying to photograph Orville in a way that clearly showed both his face and the collar tag. He was not cooperative. He'd sit still until she raised her phone, then turn away or duck his head. Finally, she managed one slightly blurry shot where his crumpled ear, cloudy eye, and the glinting vaccination tag were all visible. Looking at the photo later, she felt a pang of protectiveness. Here was a cat who'd been rejected for his appearance, wearing proof of his legitimacy like a badge. The world demanded so much documentation just to exist. The building presented other challenges too. The garbage truck continued its Thursday morning assault on silence. The quarterly inspections meant strangers with clipboards walking the hallways, knocking on doors, checking smoke detectors and water heaters. Each event sent Orville into temporary hiding, followed by a prolonged period of re-establishing his vigilance. But something was shifting. Instead of simply hiding and emerging when the threat passed, Orville began a new pattern: disappear, resurface after a few minutes, approach the heater, look at Eudora, disappear again, resurface, repeat. He was training her, she realized, drawing her attention to that specific spot in the room, over and over, as if conducting a drill. Late in the second month, during a particularly quiet evening when rain drummed steadily against the windows, Eudora sat at her small dining table working on a jigsaw puzzle, a landscape of English countryside that reminded her of a trip she'd taken in her 30s. Orville was in his usual spot near the heater, but instead of his typical alert posture, he seemed restless. He'd sit for a moment, stand, circle, sit again. His tail twitched irregularly. "You okay, buddy?" Eudora asked. He looked at her, then at the heater, then back at her. Then he stood and walked to her side, pressing his scarred head against her leg, the first truly affectionate gesture he'd made in 2 months. Eudora's throat tightened. "We're going to be okay," she whispered, though she wasn't entirely sure who she was trying to convince. The follow-up appointment with Dr. Lennox was scheduled for the end of the month. As Eudora marked it on her calendar, she wondered what the doctor would find. Was Orville's constant vigilance a symptom of anxiety that could be managed, or was it something deeper? Something instinctual that had kept him alive through circumstances Eudora would never fully understand. And why did he keep returning to that heater, as if it held secrets only he could hear? March arrived with the tentative promise of spring, though in Astoria that meant slightly less rain rather than actual sunshine. The cherry trees along Maritime Avenue began to bud, and the Saturday farmers market reopened for the season in the parking lot behind the Maritime Museum. Eudora had been attending the market regularly for years. It was one of the rituals that structured her retirement, giving her weekends shape and purpose. Fresh vegetables, artisanal bread, local honey, and the chance to chat with neighbors who gathered around the coffee cart. But this year, she hesitated. Could she bring Orville? Should she even try? Dr. Lennox had mentioned the importance of mental stimulation, and the shelter had noted in Orville's file that he was cat-aggressive but tolerant of controlled public settings. Eudora interpreted this to mean he wouldn't attack random children, but probably wouldn't enjoy them either. She purchased a harness designed for cats, an elaborate contraption of straps and buckles that promised both security and comfort. Getting it on Orville took 15 minutes and resulted in a scratched forearm, but eventually he stood in her living room wearing forest green nylon, looking simultaneously resigned and offended. "This is temporary," she told him, "just while we're outside. Deal?" His expression suggested there was no deal, only surrender. Their first trip to the farmer's market was an education in overstimulation. Eudora kept Orville close, the leash short, as they navigated between vendor stalls. The smells alone were overwhelming. Sourdough bread from the artisan baker, smoked salmon from the fisherman, bundles of fresh herbs, and the ever-present salt air that blew in from the Columbia River. Orville's ears swiveled constantly, trying to track every sound. Dogs barked. Children shrieked. The coffee vendor's steam wand hissed. A street musician played acoustic guitar near the museum entrance. And everywhere, people bent down to peer at Orville, commenting on his unique appearance with varying degrees of tact. Oh my, what happened to his ear? Is that one eye cloudy? Poor thing, he looks like he's been through wars. Eudora smiled tightly and kept moving. She bought tomatoes and greens, declined samples of goat cheese because she wasn't sure if Orville would react badly, and made her way toward the far end of the market where vendors accepted the Double Up Food Bucks program, bonus coupons that matched SNAP benefits to encourage fresh food purchases. She'd been using the program since her retirement income proved tighter than anticipated, and she felt no shame in it. But explaining the system to curious onlookers while managing an anxious cat required a level of multitasking that left her exhausted. By the time they returned to the apartment, Orville was trembling slightly. He pulled off the harness immediately, a feat Eudora hadn't thought possible, and retreated to his cardboard carrier. He didn't emerge for 3 hours, and when he finally did, he ate less than half his dinner. Too much, Eudora said quietly. I pushed you too hard. She adjusted. The following Saturday, she left Orville home and completed her market run alone, returning within 40 minutes. The Saturday after that, she brought him but stayed only 20 minutes, skipping the far end entirely. By the 4th week, they'd found a rhythm. Arrive when the market opened at 9 before the crowds peaked, visit only 3 or 4 vendors, avoid the coffee cart chaos, and leave before the street musicians started playing. Orville tolerated this compromise. He'd walk beside her, never pulling, never lagging, and he'd sit patiently while she purchased vegetables or bread. People still commented on his appearance, but Eudora developed stock responses that shut down invasive questions. He's a rescue. He's doing great. Thanks for your concern. The unexpected benefit came from Mrs. Venora, who noticed them during one of these abbreviated market trips. Mrs. Venora lived on the 3rd floor of the Whitmore Arms, a woman in her 70s who volunteered at the elementary school library and always dressed in layers of flowing scarves, regardless of weather. That's quite a remarkable cat you have, she said, approaching with her usual swirl of purple and teal fabric. His name is Orville, Eudora replied, grateful for a kind tone rather than pity or morbid curiosity. Would he like to meet children? I host a reading hour on Tuesday afternoons in the lobby. My granddaughter Lily has been practicing her chapter books, and sometimes the young readers benefit from a calm presence. Animals can be very therapeutic. Eudora's first instinct was to refuse. Orville barely tolerated the market. How would he handle a group of children? But Mrs. Venora's expression was hopeful, and Eudora found herself considering the idea. Dr. Lennox had mentioned mental stimulation, controlled exposure. Maybe this was worth trying. Tuesday afternoons, what time? 3 o'clock, just for 30 minutes. We keep it small, usually just Lily and 1 or 2 others from the building. Let me think about it, Eudora said. That Tuesday, she brought Orville down to the lobby at 3 o'clock. The space had been transformed with a thick area rug, floor cushions, and a small bookshelf that Mrs. Venora had somehow procured. 3 children sat in a semicircle. Lily, a girl of about 9 with serious eyes and neat braids. Tobin, a boy maybe 6 or 7 with a gap-toothed smile. And Mika, who looked about 10 and clutched a book with a dragon on the cover. This is Orville, Mrs. Venora announced. He's going to join us for reading time, but we need to remember soft voices, gentle movements, and no sudden grabbing. Can everyone do that? 3 heads nodded. Eudora set Orville down in the center of the rug, half expecting him to bolt. Instead, he surveyed the children with his usual deliberate assessment, then walked to the edge of the rug and sat down, tucking his paws beneath his chest. His eyes were half closed, but his ears remained alert. Lily began reading aloud from a book about a girl who discovered a secret garden. Her voice was soft and measured, and she only stumbled once on a longer word. Tobin fidgeted, but stayed quiet. Mika followed along in her own book, occasionally glancing at Orville as if checking that he was still there. 30 minutes passed. Orville didn't move except to adjust his tail once. When Mrs. Venora announced the end of reading time, the children reluctantly returned their books to the shelf, and Lily paused to whisper, "Thank you, Orville." Walking back up to the apartment, Eudora felt Orville's exhaustion in the way he leaned slightly against her leg. She'd pushed his limits again, but this time it felt different. This time he'd chosen to stay. He'd found utility, purpose, in something as simple as being present while a child read aloud. The reading hour became a weekly event. Orville attended every Tuesday, and each session reinforced something Eudora was slowly learning. This cat needed work. Not play, exactly, but meaningful occupation. He needed to feel useful. Other residents began to notice. Mrs. Chen, the building manager, smiled when she saw them heading to the lobby on Tuesday afternoons. Mr. Kowalski from 1A started greeting Orville by name in the hallway. Even the mail carrier, a perpetually rushed woman named Diane, paused one day to remark, "That's the reading cat, right? My sister's kid is in that group, says he's the best listener she knows." But Eudora remained vigilant about not overextending him. She monitored his breathing during and after each event. She ensured he had quiet days between activities. She adjusted his feeding schedule to account for the energy he expended. Every victory, every successful market trip, every reading session came with calculations about cost and recovery. One evening in late March, after a particularly successful week that included both the market and 2 reading sessions, Mrs. Venora had added a Thursday group, Eudora found Orville sitting on the low shelf by the window, staring out at the darkening street. The streetlights were beginning to flicker on, and a thin fog was rolling in from the river. She sat down in her chair and watched him. This damaged cat who'd spent 8 months in a shelter passed over repeatedly because he didn't fit conventional notions of beauty. He'd been given a purpose here, small, unglamorous, but real. "You're teaching me something," she said quietly. "I'm not sure what it is yet, but I'll figure it out." Orville's ears swiveled toward her voice, but he didn't turn his head. Together they watched the fog thicken, transforming the familiar street into something soft and uncertain. What other lessons did this 3rd month hold? And why did Eudora sometimes catch herself listening for that faint whistle from the heater, the way Orville always did, as if it were telling them both something important that they couldn't yet translate into words? April brought NOAA alerts that pinged Eudora's phone with increasing frequency. Storm warnings, high wind advisories, flood watches for the low-lying areas near the river. The Pacific Northwest's spring was unpredictable. One day could bring pale sunshine and birdsong. The next could deliver horizontal rain and wind that bent the cherry trees double. The Whitmore Arms weathered these storms with the resigned endurance of an old building that had seen worse. But this year, an email from Mrs. Chen introduced a complication. The building's boiler system needed maintenance, specifically the gas lines and heating units in each apartment. Unfortunately, the specialized part required for the update was on backorder. Estimated arrival: late June, maybe early July. In the meantime, the email concluded, "Please follow standard safety protocols. Ensure adequate ventilation when cooking. Check your oven's pilot light regularly, and replace smoke detector and carbon monoxide detector batteries seasonally. Thank you for your patience." Eudora read the email twice, a faint anxiety stirring in her chest. She'd lived in the building for 3 years without incident, but the idea of gas lines operating with delayed maintenance felt unsettling. She made a mental note to follow the protocols more carefully. Open windows for 10 minutes when cooking, check the oven pilot light twice before and after use, and change those detector batteries that had been sitting in her junk drawer since Christmas. She'd purchased the carbon monoxide detector months ago, taking advantage of that rebate the gas company offered to pet owners. It had seemed like a good deal at the time, $20 back if you submitted proof of purchase and pet ownership. But the detector itself was still in the packaging, tucked in the back of her kitchen drawer. She hadn't gotten around to installing it, and now the rebate deadline had passed. The detector sat there, a small monument to good intentions unfulfilled. Meanwhile, Orville's routine solidified. Tuesday and Thursday afternoons meant reading time in the lobby. Saturday mornings meant the farmer's market. The rest of the week was structured around quiet vigilance, his patrols of the apartment, his study of the heater, his careful arrangement of the blanket on the couch before settling down to nap. But something new was developing at the shelter that had originally housed him. The volunteer coordinator, a young woman named Amelia, reached out to Eudora via email with an unusual request. "We're putting together a spring adoption campaign," the message read, "focusing on animals that tend to be overlooked because of age, disability, or appearance. We'd love to feature Orville if you're willing. Just a photo and a brief update about how he's doing. It might help other imperfect pets find homes." Eudora's first instinct was to decline. Orville was private, watchful, not the kind of cat who'd appreciate being made into a poster child for anything. But then she thought about the other animals in that shelter, sitting in their cages under fluorescent lights, waiting for someone to see past their scars. "Okay," she replied. "What do you need?" Amelia arrived the following week with a professional camera and a cheerful demeanor that filled the apartment like helium. Orville took one look at her and retreated to his cardboard carrier. "That's fine," Amelia said brightly. "Sometimes the candid shots are best. Can you maybe coax him out with a treat?" What followed was an hour of attempted photography that tested everyone's patience. Orville would emerge from the carrier, but the moment Amelia raised the camera, he'd turn his head or close his eyes or simply walk away. Every photo captured either his rear end or a blurry profile. Finally, Amelia sighed and lowered the camera. "He really doesn't want his picture taken, does he?" "He's not vain," Eudora said. "He just doesn't see the point. What if we let him choose? Just leave the camera running and see what happens." Amelia set the camera on a small tripod, positioned it near the window where natural light was best, and stepped back. Then she and Eudora sat quietly at the dining table, pretending to ignore Orville entirely. 10 minutes passed. Then Orville emerged from his carrier, stretched, and walked directly to the window. Instead of sitting in his usual spot, he turned and faced the camera straight on. His crumpled ear caught the light. His cloudy eye and his clear eye both reflected the overcast sky outside. His expression was neither friendly nor unfriendly, just honest. "This is what I am," his posture seemed to say. "Take it or leave it." Amelia's eyes widened. She reached slowly for the camera and clicked once, twice. The soft shutter sound didn't faze Orville. He held his position for another moment, then turned and walked back to his carrier as if the whole thing had been his idea. "That," Amelia said softly, "is perfect." The photo went live on the shelter's social media pages 2 weeks later, part of a carousel featuring 5 perfectly imperfect pets. The caption read, "Orville, 8 months in our shelter, now thriving in his forever home. Every cat deserves a chance." The response was immediate and polarizing. Most comments were supportive, people sharing their own stories of adopting ugly or damaged animals, praising Eudora for seeing past appearance. But there were other comments too, cruel ones that made jokes about Orville's face, that questioned why anyone would want such a defective pet, that suggested euthanasia would have been kinder. Eudora read 3 of these comments before closing the browser window, her hands shaking. She deactivated her Facebook account that evening and didn't check the shelter's page again for 2 weeks. When Amelia called to say the campaign was the most successful in the shelter's history, 2 cats with special needs had been adopted that week, Eudora was glad, but she couldn't shake the residue of those cruel words. Why did people feel the need to be so casually vicious? What did it cost them to be kind? She looked at Orville, who was currently occupying his spot by the heater, eyes half closed but ears alert. He didn't need the internet's approval. He didn't need validation from strangers who would never meet him. He simply existed, doing his work of vigilance and presence. And that was enough. "I'm sorry people are terrible," she told him, "but you're doing fine." His ears flicked toward her voice, but he didn't open his eyes. The storms continued through April, each one announced by NOAA alerts and accompanied by wind that rattled the windows and rain that overwhelmed the building's old gutters. Eudora followed the safety protocols from Mrs. Chen's email religiously now. Windows opened during cooking, pilot light checked twice, though she still hadn't installed that carbon monoxide detector. It remained in the drawer, still in its packaging, a task perpetually deferred. One particularly violent storm arrived on a Tuesday evening, cancelling the reading hour in the lobby. Mrs. Benora sent apologetic texts to all the parents. Too dangerous to have children moving through the building, with wind gusts reaching 40 miles per hour. Eudora was secretly relieved. The storm gave both her and Orville permission to simply stay home, away from obligations. She made soup for dinner, opening the kitchen window despite the cold rain that spattered the sill. The gas flame on her stove flickered blue and steady. The apartment smelled of onions and carrots, and the peculiar mineral scent of rain on old buildings. Orville sat in his usual spot, watching her cook with an intensity that made her self-conscious. "It's just soup," she said. "Nothing exciting." But his gaze didn't waver. He was cataloguing something, storing data about her routines and the apartment's rhythms. Why did this cat care so much about a gas heater and a stove flame? What was he waiting for? Later that night, as wind howled and the building creaked, Eudora lay in bed thinking about Amelia's photo campaign and those cruel comments. She thought about Orville's refusal to hide his scars, his straightforward presentation to the camera. There was a kind of courage in that, not bravery exactly, but a fundamental honesty that she admired. "We're both learning something," she whispered into the darkness. From the living room she heard the soft sound of Orville shifting in his cardboard carrier, still vigilant, even in sleep, still watching over this small territory they shared. What was he protecting them from? And why did Eudora increasingly feel like she should be paying better attention to his warnings? Summer arrived with the kind of weather that made Astoria's residents forget the 9 months of rain they endured annually. Blue skies, temperatures in the pleasant 70s, and breezes that carried the scent of the ocean rather than the metallic tang of approaching storms. The cherry trees had long since shed their blossoms, replaced now by full green canopies that shaded the sidewalks. Eudora and Orville settled into their established rhythms. The farmers' market thrived in the summer weather, and their Saturday morning visits became something Eudora looked forward to all week. Orville's tolerance for the outings had improved. He no longer trembled afterward, though he always needed a long nap in his carrier upon returning home. The reading hour in the lobby had expanded. Mrs. Venora now hosted sessions 3 times a week, and a few children from outside the building had joined after hearing about the reading cat. Tobin had started bringing Orville small gifts, usually rocks he'd found near the river, which he'd present with great ceremony before reading time began. Lily, now more confident in her abilities, had moved on to chapter books with more challenging vocabulary. And Mika had started writing her own stories, which she'd sometimes read aloud to test how they sounded. Orville attended when his energy allowed. Eudora had learned to read the signs. If he ate less than usual at breakfast, or if his breathing seemed slightly labored, they'd skip that day's session. Mrs. Venora understood completely. "The children benefit even from irregular visits," she told Eudora. "They're learning that relationships require flexibility, that we accommodate others' needs. It's a good lesson." But summer also brought the 4th of July, and with it, a challenge neither Eudora nor Orville was prepared for. The Whitmore Arms lobby bulletin board announced the holiday weeks in advance. Annual 4th of July fireworks display, Columbia River waterfront, 9:30 p.m., Astoria celebrates. Eudora read the notice with growing dread. Fireworks meant noise, loud, unpredictable explosions that would echo through the waterfront district and probably rattle windows throughout the building. She thought about Orville's reaction to the garbage truck, his tendency to bolt at sudden sounds, and decided they'd simply stay inside, windows closed, maybe with some white noise to muffle the worst of it. But fireworks, she discovered, didn't restrict themselves to the official display. They started 3 days before the 4th, random bangs and pops that punctuated the evening air as people tested their contraband purchases. Orville's ears swiveled at each sound. He abandoned his spot by the heater and instead pressed himself against the baseboard in the kitchen, his body flat and his tail motionless. His ears became 2 small radars, triangulating each explosion. "It's okay," Eudora said, though she knew her reassurances meant nothing against instinctive fear. "They're just fireworks, they can't hurt you here." By the evening of July 4th, the noise had escalated. Eudora closed all the windows despite the warmth, turned on a box fan for white noise, and settled onto the couch with a book, hoping the routine would comfort both of them. At 9 o'clock, the first official firework boomed across the waterfront. The sound was enormous, rattling the windows and seeming to shake the entire building. Eudora flinched. Orville didn't run for cover. Instead, he bolted toward the apartment's utility closet, the small space that housed the water heater and electrical panel. "Orville, no!" Eudora called, but he was already squeezing through the partially open door. She found him pressed against the water heater, his face touching the warm metal as if seeking comfort in its solid reality. His sides heaved with rapid breaths. His pupils had dilated so wide that his eyes looked entirely black. "Oh, buddy," Eudora whispered. She sat on the floor beside the closet, her back against the wall, and simply kept him company. Every few minutes, another firework would explode, and Orville would press himself harder against the water heater. But he didn't panic. He didn't try to run. He'd found his safe spot and was enduring. The display lasted 40 minutes. By the time the final boom faded into scattered applause from the waterfront, Eudora's legs were cramping, and Orvel's breathing had slowed to something closer to normal. She coaxed him out with gentle words and carried him to the couch, where he immediately curled into the tightest ball she'd ever seen him manage. "That was rough," she said, "but you survived it." The next morning, she called the building management office and asked about scheduling the long-delayed boiler maintenance. Mrs. Chen sounded harried. "Still waiting on parts," she said. "The supplier is saying maybe August now. I know it's frustrating, but there's not much I can do. Just keep following those safety protocols in the meantime." Eudora hung up, feeling vaguely uneasy. She thought about Orvel's obsession with the heater, his constant monitoring of sounds and smells in the apartment. Was he reacting to something she couldn't detect, or was she reading too much into normal cat behavior? Later that day, the daylight saving time shift occurred. One of those odd quirks where summer's long evenings suddenly felt longer still. The light through Eudora's windows changed, sunset now arriving well after 8 o'clock. Orvel adjusted his patrol schedule accordingly, positioning himself in the kitchen during the prolonged twilight hours when shadows grew long and the apartment took on a golden quality. It was during one of these twilight sessions that Eudora noticed something new. She was cooking dinner, pasta with marinara sauce, and had opened the window for ventilation per Mrs. Chen's protocols. The gas flame on her stove burned steadily, blue with occasional orange flickers. Normal, she thought. But Orvel sat at the kitchen entrance, tail wrapped around his paws, staring at the stove with an intensity that bordered on aggressive. "What?" Eudora asked. "It's just the stove." He didn't look at her, his good eye and his cloudy eye both fixed on the flame, as if he could see something beyond the visible spectrum of fire and heat. Eudora turned off the burner and checked it twice. Pilot light intact, no smell of gas, nothing unusual. But when she resumed cooking 10 minutes later, Orvel returned to his post, watching, waiting. That night she lay in bed thinking about the 4th of July, about Orvel pressed against the water heater, about his vigilance that never seemed to ease. Dr. Lennox had mentioned that his heart murmur remained stable as long as stress was managed. But what constituted stress for a cat who'd learned that danger could come from anywhere? "We'll figure it out," she whispered into the darkness. "Whatever you're worried about, we'll figure it out together." But even as she said it, she felt the weight of that promise. Because what if Orvel was trying to tell her something important? What if his constant vigilance wasn't anxiety or trauma, but intelligence, a survival instinct honed by hard experience? What if he was right to be watching so carefully? September arrived with the first hint of rain after the dry summer. The leaves on the cherry trees began their slow transformation toward gold and red, and the farmer's market started featuring apples and squash instead of berries and tomatoes. The building's residents began closing windows and turning on their heating systems as temperatures dropped toward the 50s at night. Eudora received another email from Mrs. Chen. "Good news! The boiler parts have arrived. We'll be scheduling maintenance appointments for all units throughout October. Please respond with your available times for a 2-hour service window. Thank you for your patience." Finally, Eudora thought. She replied with her availability and marked the appointment on her calendar, October 15th, between 1 and 3 in the afternoon. But October 15th came and went with no technician. Mrs. Chen sent an apologetic email explaining that the repair team had encountered complications in the units they'd already serviced, causing delays. Eudora's new appointment would be sometime in early November. The delay didn't particularly concern Eudora. The heating system worked fine, and she'd been following the safety protocols for months now, windows open when cooking, oven checked religiously, though that carbon monoxide detector still sat in its packaging in the kitchen drawer. She kept meaning to install it, but there were always other priorities. The reading sessions with Mrs. Venora, the market trips, the slow, careful work of managing Orvel's routines to prevent exhausting his compromised heart. Orvel's behavior, meanwhile, had intensified in ways Eudora couldn't quite interpret. His vigilance around the heater had always been present, but now it felt more urgent. He'd sit for hours with his face near the baseboard, sniffing the air with a concentration that suggested he was analyzing something complex. Sometimes he'd touch the baseboard with his paw, then look at Eudora as if expecting her to understand a language she didn't speak. One evening in late October, after a particularly beautiful sunset had painted the apartment in shades of copper and rose, Orville did something new. Eudora was washing dishes from dinner when she heard a loud clatter from the living room. She rushed in to find him standing on the coffee table, a surface he normally avoided, having knocked over a glass water bottle she'd left there. Water spread across the table's surface and began dripping onto the floor. Orville stood in the middle of the puddle, his paws wet, staring at her with such intensity that she felt a jolt of adrenaline. "What is wrong with you?" she said, more confused than angry. He jumped down from the table, walked directly to the baseboard near the heater and touched it twice with his front paw. Then he turned and looked at her again. The message was clear, even if Eudora couldn't understand it. Pay attention. This spot. Now. She grabbed a towel to clean up the water, but her hands were trembling slightly. Orville's behavior was escalating beyond anything she'd seen before. Was he sick? Was his heart murmur worsening? Or was he trying to communicate something that she was too obtuse to comprehend? The next morning, she called Dr. Lennox's office and scheduled an appointment for later that week. Maybe the vet would have insights into Orville's behavior. Maybe there was a medical explanation for his increasing agitation. But before that appointment could arrive, everything changed. It was a Tuesday night, the kind of evening when autumn asserted itself with confidence, wind from the south carrying the smell of rain, temperature dropping toward the 40s, the kind of night that made Astoria's residents grateful for heating systems and warm blankets. Eudora had gone to bed at 10:30, exhausted from a day that included the farmer's market and an afternoon reading session where Lily had struggled through a particularly challenging chapter about fractions disguised as a story about dividing pizza. Orville had been restless all evening, pacing between his carrier and the heater, but Eudora had attributed it to the weather change. Cats were sensitive to barometric pressure, weren't they? She fell asleep quickly, the deep sleep of genuine tiredness, and then she was awake. Not gradually, not with the slow surfacing of normal morning waking, but instantly, adrenaline-sharp consciousness that made her heart pound before she'd even opened her eyes. Something was wrong. The apartment was dark, except for the dim glow of the streetlight through her bedroom window. She could hear wind rattling the panes, and she could hear something else, a rhythmic tapping like Morse code coming from the kitchen. Eudora fumbled for her bedside lamp and made her way to the kitchen, her legs unsteady. The tapping continued, insistent, deliberate. She rounded the corner and found Orville on the counter, another forbidden surface, batting at the water bottle she'd refilled and left there earlier. He'd knock it toward the edge, stop it before it fell, then knock it again. His eyes were wild, pupils dilated despite the light she'd turned on. "Orville, stop!" He knocked the bottle harder. It fell, hit the counter's edge, and exploded on the tile floor. Water spread everywhere. And in that moment, as Eudora stood in her kitchen at 3 in the morning, with water pooling around her bare feet, she smelled it. Something metallic and sweet, like copper pennies mixed with overripe fruit. A smell that didn't belong in her apartment. A smell she'd never noticed before, but that now seemed to fill her nose and throat. Her eyes went to the heater. Orville had already abandoned the counter and was at his usual post, pressing his face to the baseboard. His pupils were narrow slits now, his entire body tense. Eudora's heart hammered. That carbon monoxide detector. Where had she put it? The kitchen drawer. Still in its packaging. Never installed. She yanked the drawer open, her hands shaking so badly she could barely tear through the cardboard. The detector was small, white plastic with a digital display, battery-operated. She fumbled with the battery compartment, finally got it open, inserted the batteries from the package. The device beeped once, twice. Then the display lit up. 0 ppm. Eudora's breath came out in a shaky exhale. 0. There was nothing wrong. She'd panicked over nothing. Orville had knocked over water because he was thirsty or anxious, or who knew why cats did anything, and she'd smelled something that was probably just old plumbing or... She held the detector near the baseboard where Orville sat. The numbers began to climb. 15 ppm, 25 ppm, 40 ppm. "Oh God," Eudora whispered. She ran to the windows and threw them all open, despite the cold wind and the rain that immediately began spotting the sills. She grabbed her phone and dialed the building's emergency maintenance number with fingers that felt numb and clumsy. The line rang 4 times before a groggy voice answered. "This is Eudora Hale in 2B. I have a carbon monoxide reading of... She checked the detector. 60 parts per million and climbing. We need emergency service now. The voice on the other end became instantly alert. Evacuate your unit immediately. I'm calling the gas company and fire department. Get yourself and your cat out now. Eudora had never moved so fast. She grabbed Orville, no carrier, no harness, just scooped him up in her arms and ran for the hallway. Other doors were opening now, residents emerging in pajamas and robes, confused by the commotion. Gas leak, Eudora said to anyone who'd listen. Carbon monoxide. Get out. Mrs. Chen appeared from somewhere, taking charge with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd drilled for emergencies. The fire department arrived within 10 minutes, bringing equipment and ordering a full building evacuation. Eudora stood on the sidewalk across the street. Orville clutched against her chest as EMTs checked her vital signs and asked questions about symptoms. No headache, no nausea, no confusion? No, she said. My cat woke me up. He knocked over water until I paid attention. The EMT, a young man with kind eyes, looked at Orville, who'd gone limp in Eudora's arms, his breathing shallow and rapid. Smart cat, he said. You might want to get him checked out. Animals can be more sensitive to CO than humans. The building's residents clustered in groups on the sidewalk, some wrapped in blankets the fire department had provided. Mrs. Venora found Eudora and pressed a thermos of tea into her free hand. You saved us, the older woman said quietly. That detector probably saved the whole building. But Eudora shook her head. It wasn't the detector. I never installed it. It was Orville. He's been trying to tell me for months that something was wrong. The technician from the gas company emerged from the building at 4:30 in the morning, his expression grim. He spoke to Mrs. Chen for several minutes, then addressed the gathered residents. We've shut off gas to the entire building. There's a leak in the main line feeding the heating system. Been developing slowly for months. Could have been catastrophic if it had gone undetected much longer. The building will need to relocate residents temporarily while we do a complete system replacement, probably looking at 2 weeks minimum. 2 weeks. Eudora's mind reeled. Where would she go? How would she manage Orville in temporary housing? But those questions could wait. Right now she just held her cat, this scarred, watchful, determined cat who'd refused to give up on warning her, and whispered into his crumpled ear, "Thank you. Thank you for not giving up on me." His breathing was still too fast, his body trembling with exhaustion. He'd pushed himself beyond his limits tonight, stressed his compromised heart to sound an alarm that Eudora had been too slow to understand. The price of heroism, she thought. Every victory has its cost. As dawn began to lighten the sky and the rain continued its steady patter, Eudora knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would never again dismiss Orville's vigilance as anxiety or trauma. This cat had been training her all along, teaching her to pay attention, to listen, to see what she'd been trained to overlook. He'd been working just as he'd always done, and tonight, that work had saved lives. The Red Cross set up a temporary shelter in the high school gymnasium, but Eudora couldn't imagine bringing Orville to that chaos. Dozens of displaced residents, crying children, the harsh lighting and constant noise. Instead, she accepted Mrs. Venora's offer to stay in her daughter's vacant apartment across town while the building underwent repairs. "Sarah's doing a semester abroad," Mrs. Venora explained, leading Eudora up the stairs of a converted Victorian, painted cheerful yellow. "The place is just sitting empty. You'd be doing me a favor by keeping an eye on it." The apartment was small but comfortable. One bedroom, a cozy living room with built-in bookshelves, and a kitchen that smelled faintly of cinnamon. Most importantly, it was quiet. Eudora set Orville's carrier down and opened the door, half expecting him to retreat into it as he had that first day at the Whitmore Arms. But Orville emerged slowly, his sides still heaving with labored breaths from the night's exertion. He surveyed the new space with less vigilance than she'd anticipated, more like an exhausted soldier granted temporary leave than a scout mapping enemy territory. He found a spot beneath the radiator in the living room, curled into a tight ball, and didn't move for 6 hours. Eudora tried to rest but couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the carbon monoxide detector's climbing numbers, smelled that sweet metallic odor she'd ignored for too long, heard the rhythmic tapping of Orville's paw against the water bottle. How many nights had he tried to warn her? How many times had she dismissed his behavior as anxiety when it was actually intelligence? She called Dr. Lennox's emergency line and explained what had happened. The vet answered personally, her voice alert despite the early hour. "Bring him in as soon as we open. Carbon monoxide exposure combined with his heart condition. We need to make sure there's no lasting damage." At 8 o'clock, Eudora carried Orville to Dr. Lennox's clinic. The morning was grey and cold, rain falling in that persistent northwest way that suggested it might continue forever. Orville didn't resist being placed in the carrier, which worried Eudora more than anything. His usual opposition to confinement had been replaced by passive exhaustion. Dr. Lennox performed a thorough examination, listening to Orville's heart for what felt like an eternity. When she finally removed the stethoscope, her expression was serious but not alarmed. "The murmur is stable," she said, "which is honestly remarkable given what he went through last night. His heart rate is elevated, but that's to be expected. We'll do some blood work to check for CO exposure markers, but based on what you've told me, he probably saved you from far more serious exposure by waking you when he did." "He's been trying to tell me for months," Eudora said, her voice tight. "I just didn't understand." Dr. Lennox's hand rested gently on Orville's back. "Animals often perceive things we miss. Their survival instincts are more acute than ours, but you did listen, eventually. That's what matters." The blood work came back within the hour. Orville's levels showed minor CO exposure, enough to cause stress and fatigue, but not enough to cause organ damage. Dr. Lennox prescribed rest, lots of water, and strict limitation of any strenuous activity. "No reading sessions for at least 2 weeks, she said firmly. "No market trips, just quiet recovery time. His heart needs to stabilize." Back at Mrs. Venora's daughter's apartment, Eudora created a recovery space for Orville. She set up his litter box in the bathroom, his food and water in the kitchen, and his cardboard carrier in the living room near the radiator. She lined the carrier with soft blankets and placed his favorite toy, the catnip mouse he'd never shown much interest in, but insisted on keeping nearby just inside the opening. Orville spent most of the next 3 days inside that carrier, emerging only to eat small amounts and use the litter box. His breathing gradually returned to normal, but his energy remained depleted. When he did venture out, he'd sit beneath the radiator with his eyes half closed, as if the warmth was the only comfort he could accept. Eudora stayed close, reading in the chair by the window or preparing simple meals in the small kitchen. She thought about calling her daughter Marissa in Portland, about explaining what had happened, but decided against it. Marissa would worry, would offer to drive up, and Eudora didn't have the energy to manage anyone else's concern right now. On the 4th day, Mrs. Venora knocked on the door, bearing a casserole and news from the Whitmore Arms. "They've started the repairs," she reported, settling into the chair across from Eudora. "Complete gas line replacement, new boiler system, new detectors in every unit. Hardwired ones, not battery-operated. Mrs. Chen said the gas company is covering most of the cost since it was their faulty inspection that missed the leak in the first place. How long until we can go home? They're saying 2 weeks still, but you know how these things go. Could be 3. Eudora nodded, trying not to feel overwhelmed by the displacement. Mrs. Venora's eyes drifted to Orville, who was watching them from beneath the radiator. "How's our hero doing?" "Exhausted, Doctor." Lennox said his heart is okay, but he pushed himself hard that night. He's going to need time to recover. Mrs. Venora was quiet for a moment, then said, "Lily's been asking about him. I told her what happened, and she's been writing him letters. Well, drawing pictures, really. Would you like them? Or would that be too much right now?" Eudora felt her throat tighten. "I'd like them. I think he'd like them too when he's feeling better." The pictures arrived the next day. A stack of construction paper drawings showing Orville with a cape, Orville wearing a medal, Orville surrounded by hearts. Lily's earnest printing decorated each one. "Thank you for saving everyone. You are the best cat. Get well soon." Eudora taped them to the wall above the radiator where Orville could see them. He didn't react immediately, but later that evening she found him sitting up, looking at the drawings with his head tilted in that characteristic way. "You made an impression," she told him. "People are grateful." His response was to curl back into a tight ball and close his eyes. Gratitude didn't interest him. He'd simply done what needed to be done. The temporary apartment became a space of quiet healing. Eudora established minimal routines. Feeding times, gentle conversation, short periods of music from the radio Mrs. Venora had lent her. She avoided anything that might stress Orville further. No vacuum cleaner, no loud television, just the soft rhythm of rainfall against the windows and the gentle hiss of the radiator. On the 6th day, Orville ate a full meal for the first time since the evacuation. On the 7th day, he emerged from his carrier and spent an hour exploring the apartment's perimeter. On the 8th day, he jumped onto the windowsill and watched the rain-soaked street below with something approaching his old vigilance. "You're coming back," Eudora said softly. But she noticed how he returned to the carrier after each small adventure, how he still needed that enclosed space to feel safe. Recovery wasn't linear. It was a series of small advances and necessary retreats. Mrs. Chen called on the 10th day with an update. "Good news and complicated news. The repairs are ahead of schedule. You can return to your unit on Monday. But the gas company wants to do a follow-up inspection of every apartment, and they're requiring all residents to have functioning carbon monoxide detectors before they'll turn the gas back on. Hardwired ones, like I mentioned. They're installing them as part of the renovation, but you'll also need to keep your portable one as backup." "That won't be a problem," Eudora said, thinking of the detector that had sat unused in her drawer for months until Orville forced her to use it. "Also," Mrs. Chen continued, her voice taking on a different tone, "there's going to be a small gathering in the lobby on Tuesday evening. Nothing formal, just some residents want to acknowledge what happened. Your presence would mean a lot. I don't think Orville is ready for—" "Just you is fine. Everyone understands he needs rest. But Eudora, you and that cat prevented a tragedy. People want to say thank you." After the call ended, Eudora sat in the chair by the window and watched Orville sleep in his carrier. A gathering. Recognition. She'd spent her whole life avoiding the spotlight, doing her work quietly and efficiently without needing acknowledgement. But maybe this wasn't about her. Maybe it was about letting people express gratitude, about allowing them to process their fear and relief. And maybe it was about showing them that heroes didn't always look the way they expected. Sometimes heroes had crumpled ears and cloudy eyes and a stubborn refusal to be overlooked. "We'll go home soon," she told Orville. "Back to our real home, and then we'll figure out what comes next." From inside the carrier, she heard a soft sound that might have been a sigh. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. For tonight, rest was enough. Monday morning arrived with pale sunshine breaking through the clouds, a rare gift in late October. Eudora packed their belongings carefully. Orville's food and bowls, his litter box supplies, the stack of drawings from Lily, and of course, the carbon monoxide detector that had finally fulfilled its purpose. The drive back to the Whitmore Arms took only 15 minutes, but Eudora's anxiety built with each block. How would Orville react to returning to the apartment where he'd fought so hard to warn her? Would the memories of that night trigger stress? Would he ever trust the space again? Mrs. Chen met them in the lobby, her usual professional demeanor softened by genuine warmth. "Welcome back. We've made some improvements you'll appreciate." The hallway to Unit 2B smelled different. Fresh paint and new materials rather than the old building's familiar mustiness. When Eudora unlocked her door, she found her apartment transformed in small but significant ways. The walls had been repainted a warm cream color. New baseboards ran along the perimeter, and most notably, a white carbon monoxide detector was mounted on the wall near the heater, its green LED light steady and reassuring. "We installed them in every unit," Mrs. Chen explained, hardwired to the building's electrical system with battery backup. The gas company also upgraded the ventilation system and installed automatic shut-off valves. "What happened to your unit?" She paused, her voice tightening. It shouldn't have been possible. The original inspection missed the deterioration in the main line. They're implementing new protocols across all their properties. Eudora set Orville's carrier down in the living room. "Thank you for handling everything." "Thank your cat," Mrs. Chen said quietly. "He's the reason we're having this conversation instead of—" She didn't finish the sentence. After Mrs. Chen left, Eudora opened the carrier door and waited. Orville emerged slowly, his movements still deliberate and cautious. He'd lost weight during the ordeal and recovery. His ribs were more visible beneath his patchy coat, but his eyes were clear and alert as he surveyed the apartment. He went directly to the heater. Eudora held her breath, watching as he approached the spot where he'd maintained his long vigil. He sniffed the new baseboard, investigated the mounted detector with its steady green light, and then sat down. Just sat, like he'd done that first day months ago studying the appliance. But something was different. His posture was less tense. His tail, instead of being wrapped tightly around his paws, lay relaxed beside him. He looked at the heater for a long moment, then looked at Eudora. then closed his eyes and began to purr. The sound was so unexpected that Eudora had to sit down. In all the months they'd lived together, she'd never heard Orville purr. She'd assumed he wasn't capable of it, that whatever life had done to him before the shelter had damaged that particular expression of contentment. But here he was, purring in front of the heater that had been the source of danger, in the space they'd both survived, in the home they'd built together through patience and attention and the hard work of learning each other's languages. "Okay," Eudora whispered. "Okay, we're home." The rest of Monday passed in quiet re-establishment. Eudora unpacked their belongings, restocked the refrigerator, and gradually let herself believe they were truly back. Orville moved through the apartment with more confidence than she'd expected, reclaiming his usual spots: the low shelf by the window, the cardboard carrier positioned near the now-safe heater, the particular corner of the couch where the afternoon sun created the perfect napping temperature. That evening, Mrs. Venora stopped by with a care package, homemade soup, fresh bread, and a card signed by the reading group children. "Tobin insisted I tell you that he's been practicing extra hard, so when Orville is ready to come back, he can read a whole chapter without stopping. Tell him we're both looking forward to it," Eudora said, "but it might be another week or two. Dr. Lennox wants Orville fully recovered before we resume any activities. Take all the time you need. The children understand. They're just glad you're both safe." Tuesday brought the promised gathering in the lobby. Eudora debated bringing Orville, but ultimately decided against it. He was resting peacefully and the stimulation might set back his recovery. She went alone, wearing the nicest cardigan she owned and feeling oddly nervous about the whole thing. The lobby had been transformed with folding tables bearing simple refreshments, cookies from the bakery on Maritime Avenue, coffee in thermal carafes, juice boxes for the children who'd been invited. About 30 residents clustered in groups, and when Eudora entered, a spontaneous round of applause broke out. She felt her face flush. This was exactly what she'd been afraid of, being made the center of attention when all she'd done was finally listen to what her cat had been trying to tell her. But Mrs. Chen stepped forward with a small wrapped package. "On behalf of the building residents and the property management, we want to thank you. Your quick thinking prevented what could have been a tragedy affecting all 46 units in this building." "It wasn't me," Eudora said, her voice barely audible over the gathered crowd. "It was Orville. He's the one who wouldn't give up trying to warn me." "Where is he?" someone called. "We want to thank him too." "Resting," Eudora replied. "Doctor's orders. He pushed himself very hard that night, and his heart needs time to recover." A murmur of concern rippled through the crowd. These people, Eudora realized, had come to care about her strange, damaged cat. This animal most of them had only seen briefly in hallways or during reading sessions. He'd become part of the building's fabric, without either of them quite realizing it. Mrs. Chen encouraged her to open the package. Inside was a framed photograph, the picture Amelia had taken for the shelter's adoption campaign, showing Orville with his crumpled ear and cloudy eye, facing the camera with that expression of fundamental honesty. Below the photo, a small plaque read, "Not every hero smiles for the camera." "The shelter sent it over," Mrs. Chen explained. "Apparently that campaign photo has become their most successful adoption image ever. They've used it to place 5 cats with special needs in permanent homes." Orville started something important. Eudora traced her fingers over the frame's edge, her throat too tight for words. 5 cats, because one scarred, watchful animal had refused to hide what he was. Tobin approached shyly, accompanied by his mother. He held out a drawing. Orville wearing a cape made of what appeared to be glitter and cotton balls. "I made this for him," the boy said, "for being brave. He'll love it," Eudora managed. "Thank you, Tobin." Lily came next, then Mika, then other children and adults Eudora had only nodded to in passing. Each had something to say. "Thank you. We're grateful. Please tell Orville we said hello." The maintenance technician who'd taken the emergency call shook her hand with tears in his eyes. "I've been in this business 20 years, he said. "This is the first time a pet owner's vigilance caught something before it became catastrophic. Usually we're responding to tragedies. This time, we prevented one." The gathering lasted an hour. When Eudora finally returned to her apartment, she felt exhausted but strangely lighter. She hung the framed photo on the wall opposite Orville's favorite spot, where he could see it when he woke. He was currently stretched in his cardboard carrier, eyes closed but ears twitching at the sound of her return. She sat on the floor beside him and showed him Tobin's glittery drawing. "Look what you've inspired," she said softly. "All these people, all these other cats finding homes. You changed things, Orville, more than you'll ever know." His eyes opened slowly, amber and clouded white, both focused on her. Then he shifted slightly, creating a small space in the carrier, an invitation. Eudora rarely intruded on his chosen sleeping spaces, but this felt different. She carefully positioned herself against the carrier's opening, and Orville shifted again so his back pressed against her leg. The warmth of him, solid and real and alive, made her eyes sting. "We made it," she whispered. "Both of us. We made it through." Outside, the October evening darkened toward night. The new detector on the wall maintained its steady green light. The heater hummed softly, its sound no longer ominous but simply part of the apartment's normal rhythm. And in that moment, Eudora understood what Orville had been teaching her all along. Vigilance wasn't the same as fear. Paying attention wasn't paranoia. Sometimes watching carefully was the most important work anyone could do. Tomorrow would bring the next challenge, whatever that might be. But tonight, they were home, safe, and together. That was enough. The following days established a new normal. Eudora returned to her routine slowly, conscious of not overtaxing either herself or Orville. They skipped the Saturday farmers' market the first week back, and Eudora didn't mind, Mrs. Venora offered to pick up produce for her, and the break felt like permission to simply exist without obligation. But by the second week, Orville's energy had returned enough that Dr. Lennox gave cautious approval for resuming modified activities. "Short trips only," she emphasized during the follow-up appointment. "No more than 30 minutes out, and watch his breathing constantly. If you see any signs of distress, we're back to strict rest." The first Saturday market trip felt both familiar and strange. Eudora kept Orville's harness loose, the leash short, and chose the quietest route through the vendors. People recognized them immediately. "That's the cat from the news," a teenager said to her friend, pointing. Eudora blinked. "News? Yeah, the Astoria Daily ran a story about the gas leak. Featured a photo of your cat and everything." She hadn't seen the article, hadn't thought to look. But apparently, their story had spread beyond the Whitmore Arms, becoming part of the town's collective narrative. A few vendors approached to thank her directly. The sourdough baker insisted on giving her a free loaf. The woman who sold eggs refused to accept payment. "Your cat probably saved lives that night," she said simply. "This is the least I can do." Orville tolerated the attention with his usual stoic demeanor, but Eudora noticed how quickly he tired. After 20 minutes, his breathing had accelerated slightly, and she made the decision to head home. "That's enough for today," she told him. "We proved we can do it. That's what matters." Back at the apartment, he went directly to his carrier and slept for 4 hours. The reading sessions resumed the following Tuesday, but Mrs. Venora had restructured them based on Dr. Lennox's recommendations. Instead of 30-minute sessions 3 times a week, they'd do 15-minute sessions twice a week. Fewer children at once, lower voices, more breaks. When Eudora brought Orville down to the lobby that first Tuesday back, the children erupted in careful applause, soft clapping that wouldn't startle him. Lily had made a welcome back banner. Tobin presented him with another rock, this one painted with a lopsided heart. Mika had written a story about a brave cat who saved a city, which she read aloud in her quiet, serious voice. Orville settled on the thick rug and closed his eyes, his presence enough. The children understood that he was still recovering, that his participation now came in the form of simply being there, and they adjusted their energy accordingly, reading in softer voices, moving more carefully around him. "They've learned something important," Mrs. Venora told Eudora afterward, "that sometimes caring for others means giving them space to heal. That's a valuable lesson at any age." Mid-November brought another surprise. Amelia from the animal shelter called, her voice bright with excitement. "I have something to show you. Can I come by this week?" She arrived on Thursday afternoon carrying a folder and a camera. After greeting Orville with appropriate reverence, she opened the folder to reveal a poster, the same image from the earlier adoption campaign, but now part of a larger series. "We expanded the program," she explained. "Not every hero smiles for the camera" became our slogan for the fall adoption drive. We featured 5 different animals, all with disabilities or appearance issues that typically make them hard to place. Orville's photo was the anchor image. The poster showed Orville's honest, unflinching face, alongside images of a 3-legged dog, a one-eyed rabbit, a cat with no tail, and a bird with a damaged wing. The tagline read, "Perfect is overrated. Adopt a hero." "Every single one found homes," Amelia said, her eyes bright, "within 2 weeks of launching the campaign, and we've received calls from 3 other shelters wanting to use the same approach. Orville started something, Eudora. He's changing how people think about adoption." Eudora looked at the poster, then at Orville, who was currently grooming himself in a patch of afternoon sunlight. He had no idea of his impact, no awareness that his refusal to hide his imperfections had inspired systemic change. "Can I keep this?" she asked. "That's why I brought it. And I wanted to get one more photo, if you don't mind. The shelter wants to create a 'Where Are They Now?' update, showing how Orville's doing in his forever home. Nothing elaborate, just him being himself." The photo session was brief. Amelia captured Orville in his favorite spots: the carrier, the window shelf, the corner by the heater with its steady green detector light. Natural, unposed moments that showed a cat at peace in his space. "These are perfect," Amelia said, reviewing the images on her camera screen. "They tell the real story. That adoption isn't about rescue, it's about partnership." After she left, Eudora hung the poster on the wall near the framed photo from the building gathering. Orville's face looked out from both images, neither hiding nor apologizing for what he was, just existing, honestly and without compromise. That evening, Eudora received an email from Mrs. Chen. "Dear residents, as you know, we recently completed major safety upgrades to the building following the gas leak incident in October. I'm pleased to announce that the gas company has completed its final inspection and certified our building as exceeding current safety standards. In recognition of the incident that prompted these improvements, the property management has established the Orville Safety Fund, a program that will provide free carbon monoxide detectors and safety equipment to low-income households throughout Astoria. We're partnering with the local fire department to distribute detectors and provide education about gas safety. This program exists because one resident and one very special cat refused to ignore warning signs. Their vigilance saved lives and prompted changes that will protect countless others. Thank you all for your patience during the renovation process. Welcome home. Regards, Lily Chen, Building Manager." Eudora read the email 3 times. A safety fund, named after her cat. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so she did a bit of both. "You're becoming famous," she told Orville, "though I don't think you care much about that." He didn't look up from his grooming routine. Fame wasn't relevant to his work, but that night, lying in bed and listening to the familiar sounds of the building settling around her, the elevator's beep, the floor's humidity creaks, the heater's soft hum, Eudora felt something shift inside her. For so long she'd been focused on managing Orville's needs, on accommodating his vigilance and understanding his communication. She'd thought of herself as the caregiver, the translator between his instincts and human comprehension. But maybe it was more reciprocal than that. Maybe Orville had been teaching her how to live with greater attention, how to trust her perceptions, how to act when something felt wrong, even if she couldn't immediately articulate why. Maybe they'd been saving each other all along, not in one dramatic moment, but through months of small adjustments, patient observation, and the slow work of learning to speak each other's languages. She fell asleep to the sound of Orville's quiet breathing from the living room, the steady rhythm of a heart that had worked so hard and somehow kept beating. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and small victories, but tonight they were both exactly where they needed to be. What other lessons waited to be learned? What other warnings would Orville teach her to recognize? Eudora didn't know, but she was paying attention now. She'd learned that much at least, and that felt like enough. December arrived with the weather Astoria was known for. Persistent rain that fell in sheets, turning the streets into reflective surfaces that caught and distorted the Christmas lights beginning to appear in shop windows. The cherry trees on Maritime Avenue stood bare now, their branches dark against grey skies. The Whitmore Arms prepared for the holidays with restrained enthusiasm. Mrs. Chen arranged a small tree in the lobby, decorated with ornaments made by the children in Mrs. Venora's reading groups. Tobin's contribution was a salt dough cat painted grey and white with one exaggerated ear, an obvious tribute to Orville. It hung on a prominent branch where everyone could see it. Eudora had settled into winter routines that accommodated both her needs and Orville's limitations. The farmers' market had moved to its winter location, an indoor space at the community center which made trips more manageable. Fewer vendors meant less overwhelming stimulation, and Orville had adjusted to the compressed space and echoing acoustics. They went every other Saturday now, a pace that felt sustainable. The reading sessions continued their modified schedule. Mrs. Venora had expanded the program to include elderly residents who wanted to practice reading aloud, recovering their confidence after strokes, or simply maintaining cognitive sharpness. Orville's role remained the same: calm presence, non-judgmental audience, therapeutic companion. He seemed to understand the value of this work, settling into his usual spot on the rug and maintaining his half-awake, fully aware state that radiated peaceful acceptance. Dr. Lennox's most recent checkup brought good news. Orville's heart murmur remained stable, his weight had returned to healthy levels, and his overall condition showed no lingering effects from the carbon monoxide exposure. "Whatever you're doing," Dr. Lennox said, "keep doing it. He's thriving within his limitations. That's the best outcome we could hope for." Eudora had learned what those limitations were through trial and observation. 20 minutes at the market was manageable. 30 pushed him too hard. 1 reading session per week was comfortable. 2 required an extra rest day afterward. Quiet evenings at home restored him. Sudden loud noises still sent him retreating to his carrier, but he recovered more quickly now, emerging within minutes rather than hours, and he'd stopped obsessively monitoring the heater. Oh, he still checked it. Every morning, he'd sit for a few minutes near the baseboard, sniffing the air and studying the detector's green light, but it was routine now rather than urgent. The apartment was safe. The threat had been addressed. His vigilance could relax without disappearing entirely. One evening in mid-December, Eudora sat at her dining table working on Christmas cards, a tradition she'd maintained even as her circle of correspondence had shrunk over the years. Her daughter Marissa in Portland, a few cousins scattered across the country, former colleagues from her paralegal days who still sent annual updates. Orville jumped onto the table, a liberty he'd recently claimed, and sat beside the stack of cards, watching her write. His presence was companionable rather than intrusive, and Eudora found herself talking to him as she worked. "Do you remember last Christmas? I was living here alone, thinking adoption seemed like too much responsibility at my age. And then I met you in January, and look at us now." She paused, pen hovering over a card addressed to Marissa. How did she summarize this year? The adoption, the routines, the gas leak, the quiet transformation of becoming someone who paid attention, who trusted warnings, who learned to see beyond surface appearances. She settled for simple honesty. "Life this year has taught me that sometimes the things we think of as broken are actually just put together differently." Orville and I are both figuring that out. The building's annual holiday gathering was scheduled for December 20th. Mrs. Chen sent a flyer explaining the changes. Small, quiet celebration. All residents welcome. Pets allowed in the lobby for the first time. Let's appreciate what we have. Eudora wasn't sure about bringing Orville to what could potentially be a chaotic event, but Mrs. Venora convinced her. The children have been planning something special for him. It would mean a lot if he could be there. The gathering turned out to be surprisingly subdued. About 20 residents attended, and someone had brought acoustic guitar for gentle background music. The refreshments were simple: cookies, coffee, apple cider. No loud decorations or jarring colors. The whole event felt like it had been designed with Orville's sensibilities in mind. When Eudora brought him down, wearing his harness with its new tag that identified him as Orville Hero Cat Whitmore Arms, the children gathered around but kept a respectful distance. Lily, Tobin, and Mika presented him with a gift they'd clearly coordinated. A soft cushion they'd sewn themselves, complete with an embroidered O in one corner. "It's for your carrier," Lily explained, "so you can be more comfortable when you rest." Orville sniffed the cushion thoroughly, then rubbed his face against it, his version of approval. The children beamed. Mr. Kowalski from 1A approached Eudora with a card containing a gas company rebate check. "When they announced that safety fund, I got a detector for my grandson's apartment across town. Used the rebate. Figured you should know that Orville's influence is spreading beyond this building." "How many detectors has the fund distributed?" Eudora asked Mrs. Chen later. 43 so far. The fire department says they're getting requests from all over the county. Turns out a lot of low-income households don't have working detectors because they can't afford to replace batteries or purchase new units. Your cat started something important. That night, Back in the apartment with Christmas lights from the street casting colored shadows through the windows, Eudora placed the new cushion in Orville's carrier. He inspected it again, circled 3 times, and settled down with a contented sigh. "You've done good work this year," she told him. "We both have. We built something together. This life, this safety, this attention to what matters." She thought about the year's journey. 12 months since she'd walked into that shelter and seen a cat nobody wanted. 12 months of learning his language, adjusting to his needs, following his warnings, trusting his instincts. The gas leak had been dramatic, but the real story was quieter. The daily choice to pay attention, to be present, to create space for a damaged creature to become whole. And in doing so, she'd become more whole herself, less lonely, more purposeful, connected to her community in ways she'd never experienced before. The holidays passed quietly. Christmas Day was just the 2 of them. Eudora reading by the window while Orville napped in his carrier with the new cushion. Simple, peaceful, exactly what they both needed. On New Year's Eve, Mrs. Venora invited her to a small gathering on the 3rd floor, but Eudora declined. She didn't need parties or champagne or midnight countdowns. She had Orville, their routines, and the knowledge that they'd survived a year that could have ended very differently. At 11:50, with distant fireworks already popping across the waterfront, Eudora sat on the floor beside Orville's carrier. He was awake, ears twitching at each sound, but not retreating in panic. He'd learned that fireworks, while unpleasant, were temporary. "Thank you," she said softly, "for choosing me back in that shelter, for not giving up when I was too slow to understand, for teaching me to pay attention." At midnight, the town erupted with noise, fireworks, car horns, distant cheering. Orville tensed, but held his ground. Eudora stayed beside him, a steady presence until the chaos faded and the new year settled into being. January would bring a full year since his adoption, a complete cycle. What would the next year hold? More reading sessions, more market trips, more quiet evenings building the kind of life that looked unremarkable from the outside but felt profound from within. Eudora didn't know, but she'd learned to trust that whatever came, they'd face it together, this damaged woman and her damaged cat, both learning to thrive within their limitations and finding strength in unexpected places. That felt like enough. More than enough. It felt like everything. January arrived cold and clear, the kind of weather that made Astoria's residents bundle up in layers, but grateful for the break from endless rain. The anniversary of Orville's adoption approached with Eudora feeling oddly sentimental about marking the date. Mrs. Venora suggested a small celebration, nothing elaborate, just acknowledging the milestone, and Eudora found herself agreeing. They settled on January 15th, which wasn't the exact adoption date, but close enough. A quiet gathering in the lobby, just the regular reading group participants and a few others who'd grown fond of Orville over the year. The days leading up to the celebration felt both routine and significant. Eudora maintained their usual schedules, market on Saturday, reading sessions twice a week, quiet evenings at home. But she found herself reflecting on how much had changed in 12 months. The apartment had transformed from a space of wary coexistence to genuine home. Orville's routines had shaped her own in ways she hadn't anticipated. She now opened windows for ventilation, while cooking without thinking about it. She checked the carbon monoxide detector weekly, noting the green light with satisfaction. She scheduled maintenance appointments well in advance. She kept her market trips short and her social commitments manageable. These habits hadn't existed before Orville. She'd been comfortable in her retirement solitude, drifting through weeks without structure beyond what she chose to create. But now her days had purpose, small, unglamorous purpose, but real. Dr. Lennox's final checkup before the anniversary brought the best news yet. His heart murmur has actually improved slightly. Grade 2 now, maybe even grade 1. Whatever you're doing, the controlled routine, the mental stimulation without physical overexertion, it's working. Keep it up. So he can continue the reading sessions? Absolutely. They seem to be good for him emotionally, which helps physically. Just continue monitoring his breathing and energy levels. You've become excellent at reading his signals. Eudora felt a swell of pride at that assessment. She had learned to read him, to recognize the subtle differences between comfortable vigilance and stress, between healthy tiredness and exhaustion, between routine wariness and genuine alarm. The anniversary celebration was scheduled for 3 o'clock on a Tuesday. Eudora brought Orville down to the lobby at 2:50, wanting to let him acclimate before the small crowd arrived. Mrs. Venora had transformed the space with simple decorations, a banner reading 1 year of Orville, and a small table with a cake decorated to look like a cat face, complete with one crooked whisker. The children arrived first. Lily, now reading at a level 2 grades above her age, presented Orville with a leather bookmark she'd made in her art class. "For all the books we've read together," she said solemnly. Tobin brought another rock, of course, this one painted with the number 1 and a gold star. Mika, who'd been accepted into a gifted program at her school, had written a poem called The Bravest Cat, which she read aloud in her quiet, serious voice. "Not all heroes wear capes or fly. Some have crumpled ears and one cloudy eye. They watch and wait and notice things. They teach us about the safety vigilance brings. Thank you, Orville, for showing us that courage can live in one watchful cat." Eudora's throat tightened. Mika was 11 now, bright and thoughtful, and this poem captured something essential about what Orville had taught them all. Other residents trickled in. Mr. Kowalski brought a framed article from the local paper featuring the Orville Safety Fund and its impact. 68 detectors distributed so far. Mrs. Chen presented a new tag for Orville's collar, engraved with Official Building Safety Officer alongside his name. "It's honorary, of course," she said with a small smile, "but accurate." The celebration lasted 30 minutes. Orville tolerated it all from his spot on the thick rug, accepting gentle pats and admiring words with his usual stoic grace. When people asked Eudora to share the story of the gas leak, she kept it brief. "He wouldn't give up trying to warn me. I just wish I'd understood sooner." As the gathering wound down and people began to drift away, Mrs. Venora pulled Eudora aside. "I've been thinking about expanding the reading program. There's interest from the senior center and from the elementary school. Would Orville be available for occasional off-site visits? Nothing strenuous, maybe once a month. The therapeutic value of what he does, it's remarkable." Eudora considered. A year ago, she would have immediately said no, wanting to protect Orville from any additional stress. But now she understood him better. The work mattered to him. Being useful, being present, having purpose, these things sustained him as much as rest did. "Let me talk to Dr. Lennox about it," she said. "If we can structure it carefully, maybe, but his health comes first." "Of course. Always." That evening, after everyone had left and they'd returned to the quiet of their apartment, Eudora sat in her reading chair while Orville settled into his carrier with the new cushion. The winter sun was setting early, painting the walls in shades of amber and rose. "1 year," she said quietly. "We've been together 1 year." "Do you know that?" Orville's ears swiveled toward her voice, but his eyes remained closed. "I was 63 when I adopted you, old enough to know better than to take on responsibility for a special needs cat. But you know what I've learned? I needed you as much as you needed me. Maybe more." She thought about the changes in herself, the increased confidence that came from learning to trust her instincts, the connections with neighbors she'd barely known before, the sense of purpose that structured her days, the pride of watching Orville's influence spread through the community. "You taught me to pay attention," she continued, "not just to danger, but to everything, to small changes in routine, to what matters versus what's just noise, to the difference between anxiety and legitimate warning." Outside, the streetlights flickered on. The familiar sounds of the building's evening transition began, footsteps in the hallway, the elevator's mechanical beep, the heating system's gentle hum. All sounds that used to be background noise but that Eudora now noticed, catalogued, understood as part of the apartment's language. "You also taught me that imperfection isn't something to hide," she said. "That scars tell stories worth respecting. That being overlooked doesn't mean being worthless." She thought about that first day in the shelter, seeing Orville in his cage at the end of the row, how everyone else had passed him by, deterred by his appearance and his special needs, how close she'd come to doing the same thing. "I almost walked away," she admitted. "Did you know that? I almost chose one of the prettier cats, but you looked at me like I was worth your time, and that made all the difference." From the carrier came a soft sound, half purr, half sigh. Orville was listening even in his rest. The next morning brought a surprise. When Eudora opened her email, she found a message from Amelia at the animal shelter. "Dear Eudora, I wanted to let you know that the Not Every Hero Smiles for the Camera campaign has been adopted by the Regional Animal Shelter Network. They're using Orville's image and story as the centerpiece of a multi-county adoption initiative focusing on special needs animals. But more importantly, I wanted to share something personal. Remember when I came to photograph Orville and he kept turning away from the camera? I was so frustrated, but then he chose to show himself on his own terms. That moment changed how I approach my work with animals. I stopped trying to make them fit what I thought people wanted to see and started letting them show who they actually are. Since then, our adoption rates for difficult animals have tripled. We are placing cats with FIV, dogs with behavioral challenges, rabbits with disabilities, animals who would have been considered unadoptable a year ago. Orville started a revolution by simply being himself. I hope you know how extraordinary that is. With gratitude, Amelia. Eudora read the email twice, then 3 times. A revolution. Started by one stubborn cat who refused to hide what he was. She looked at Orville, currently sitting on the low shelf by the window, watching the morning street traffic. His crumpled ear caught the morning light. His cloudy eye reflected the overcast sky. His posture was alert, but not tense, watchful in the way that had become his signature. "You did it," she said. "You changed things, not by being different, but by refusing to pretend you weren't." He turned his head slightly, acknowledging her voice, but not breaking his observation of the street below. He had work to do, after all. The world required vigilance, and Eudora understood that this was how the next year would unfold. More reading sessions, possibly expanded outreach, continued routines that balanced purpose with rest, the ordinary work of being present, being useful, being exactly who they were without apology or pretense. It wasn't a dramatic life. It wouldn't make headlines beyond their small town. But it was meaningful, to the children who'd learned to read without judgment, to the residents who'd avoided tragedy, to the animals who'd found homes because one cat's photograph had shown them that imperfection could be beautiful. "Here's to year 2, Eudora said, raising her coffee mug in a small toast. From the window, Orville's tail flicked once, his version of agreement. Together, they'd keep working, keep watching, keep paying attention to what mattered. And that, Eudora had learned, was more than enough. It was everything. February brought the kind of weather that made Astoria's residents joke about building arks, rain so persistent that the river swelled and the waterfront park closed due to flooding. But inside the Whitmore Arms, life continued with the rhythms Eudora and Orville had established over the past 14 months. The expanded reading program had launched with careful planning. Once a month, Mrs. Vanora organized a special session at the senior center, and Orville attended when his energy allowed. These sessions looked different from the children's groups. Slower pacing, longer pauses, adults working through speech difficulties after strokes, or simply wanting a patient audience as they reclaimed skills they'd thought lost. Orville's presence served the same function it always had: non-judgmental witness, calm companion, living reminder that challenges could be met with grace. He'd settle on a cushion near whoever was reading and simply exist, his steady breathing and occasional ear twitch creating a space where mistakes felt safe. One particular afternoon stood out. A man named Gerald, recently moved to the assisted living facility connected to the senior center, sat with a children's book trembling in his hands. He'd had a stroke 6 months prior that affected his speech, and this was his first attempt at reading aloud since the incident. "I used to read to my grandkids," he told the small group, his words slightly slurred. "Want to do it again?" He opened the book, a simple story about a dog finding his way home, and began. The reading was halting, effortful. Several times he stumbled over words, having to sound them out syllable by syllable. Twice he stopped completely, frustrated tears forming. But Orville remained steady beside him, a warm presence against Gerald's leg. The old man would look down at the cat, take a breath and continue. When he finally finished the story 20 minutes later, a book that should have taken 5, the room erupted in gentle applause. "That was the hardest thing I've done since the stroke," Gerald said, his hand shaking as he set the book down. Then he looked at Orville. But having him there, it helped. Knowing something else survived rough treatment and came out okay. Eudora, watching from her chair against the wall, felt the familiar tightness in her throat. This was the work, not dramatic or heroic, just consistent presence in moments when people needed to feel less alone in their struggles. Back at the apartment that evening, she noticed Orville was more tired than usual. He'd eaten only half his dinner and had retreated to his carrier immediately upon returning home. His breathing was elevated, not dangerously so, but enough to concern her. She called Dr. Lennox's office first thing the next morning and was able to get an appointment that afternoon. The examination was thorough, including blood work and an updated echocardiogram. The murmur hasn't worsened, Dr. Lennox reported, but it hasn't improved further either. He's reached his baseline and that's where he'll stay. What that means practically is that we need to be even more careful about energy management. He's doing important work clearly, but we need to ensure it doesn't cost him his health. What do you recommend? Reduce the special sessions to every other month instead of monthly. Keep the regular reading groups at twice a week, but limit them to 15 minutes maximum. And institute mandatory rest days after any outing. He gets 24 hours of quiet recovery. No exceptions. Eudora implemented the changes immediately. She felt guilty about reducing the schedule, knowing how much the seniors benefited from Orville's presence, but Mrs. Venora was understanding. Quality over quantity, she said. The people who work with him will treasure those sessions even more, knowing they're rare. The next special session at the senior center, scheduled for late March, brought a surprise. When Eudora arrived with Orville, she found the room decorated with a banner reading "Thank you, Orville," and a small crowd larger than usual. Gerald was there, along with several other residents Orville had worked with over the months. Mrs. Venora explained, "They wanted to do something to recognize what he's meant to them. Nothing elaborate, just acknowledgement." One by one, people stood and shared brief stories. The woman who'd relearned to read after her stroke. The man who'd been too embarrassed to admit he'd never learned properly as a child. The widow who'd read her late husband's favorite poems aloud for the first time since his death. Each person credited Orville's steady presence as the thing that had made their effort possible. Gerald presented a gift, a soft blanket he'd purchased with help from his daughter. "For his carrier," he explained, "so he can rest comfortable after he helps us." Orville accepted the attention with his usual stoic grace, but Eudora noticed how quickly he tired. After 15 minutes, she made the decision to leave, and no one argued. They understood that protecting Orville's health meant respecting his limits. The spring months established a sustainable pace, market trips every other Saturday, reading sessions with the children twice a week, strictly limited to 15 minutes, special senior center visits every other month. And in between, quiet days at home where Orville could rest and recover. Eudora found herself settling into this rhythm with surprising contentment. Her own life had become simpler, more focused. She'd declined invitations to book clubs and social events that would have required evening commitments, choosing instead to maintain routines that supported Orville's needs. It felt like sacrifice, but it also felt like choice, prioritizing what mattered over what society suggested should matter. One April evening, sitting in her chair by the window while Orville dozed in his carrier, she received an unexpected phone call from her daughter Marissa. "Mom, I've been thinking. I'd like to come visit soon. Meet Orville, see your place, just spend time together. Would that be okay?" They hadn't seen each other in person since the previous Christmas, and Marissa's life in Portland kept her busy with her own family and career. The offer felt both wonderful and slightly complicated. Would Orville tolerate a house guest? Would Marissa understand the routines that governed their days? "That would be lovely," Eudora said carefully. "But you should know that our schedule is pretty structured around Orville's needs. We can't be spontaneous the way you might expect." "I'm not expecting spontaneous, Mom. I'm expecting to meet the cat who changed your life and see how you're really doing. I've read the articles online, seen the photos from that shelter campaign. I want to understand what this past year has been like for you." Marissa's visit was scheduled for early May. In preparation, Eudora made small adjustments to the apartment. Fresh sheets in the spare bedroom, cleared space in the bathroom, stocked extra groceries. But she refused to alter Orville's routines. The reading sessions would continue. The market trip would happen. Quiet evenings would remain quiet. When Marissa arrived, hauling a weekend bag and a gift basket of Portland treats, her first comment was about the apartment itself. "It feels different," she said, looking around. "Calmer, more purposeful." "That's Orville's influence," Eudora replied. Meeting Orville was anticlimactic in the best way. He emerged from his carrier, assessed Marissa with his usual thorough study, and then returned to his spot by the window. No drama, no excessive friendliness, just acknowledgement of a new presence in his territory. "He's beautiful," Marissa said quietly. "Most people don't see him that way." "Then most people aren't paying attention. Look at how intentional he is. Every movement deliberate, every glance purposeful. That's beautiful." Over the weekend, Marissa accompanied them to the Saturday market and attended one of the reading sessions with the children. She met Mrs. Venora, the children, several neighbors. And in the evenings, she and Eudora really talked, in a way they hadn't in years. "You seem happy, Mom," Marissa said on her last evening. "Not just content, but actually happy. I haven't seen you like this since before Dad died." Eudora considered this. Her late husband had passed 8 years ago, and the years since had been about adjustment, about finding new purpose in retirement, about managing loneliness. But Marissa was right. Something had shifted this past year. "Orville taught me that work doesn't have to be dramatic to be meaningful," she said. "That paying attention is valuable, that being present matters, and that sometimes the things we think of as damaged are just built differently. Still strong, still capable, just requiring different understanding." "You're not just talking about Orville, are you?" "No, I'm talking about both of us." After Marissa left, Eudora found a note tucked into the kitchen drawer where she kept Orville's treats. "Mom, thank you for showing me what this past year has meant. Orville is lucky to have you, but I think you're just as lucky to have him. You've both found exactly what you needed. Love, Marissa." That evening, as the spring sun set late and cast long shadows through the apartment, Eudora reflected on the journey from that January day in the shelter to this May evening in her peaceful home. 14 months had transformed everything, not through grand gestures, but through consistent small choices, patient observation, and the willingness to be changed by relationship. She looked at Orville, currently stretched in a patch of fading sunlight, his breathing steady and his expression peaceful. This cat who'd been rejected repeatedly for failing to meet conventional standards of beauty or behavior. This cat who'd saved lives not through dramatic action, but through stubborn, persistent attention to warning signs everyone else missed. "We're a good team," she said softly. His ear twitched, acknowledgement without breaking his meditation. The work would continue. The reading sessions, the market trips, the quiet evenings maintaining vigilance over their small territory. Nothing about their life together would seem remarkable to outsiders. No headlines would be written about the daily choice to show up for each other, to honor routines, to find meaning in small, consistent actions. But Eudora had learned that remarkable didn't mean dramatic. Remarkable meant choosing presence over convenience. Remarkable meant paying attention when it would be easier to look away. Remarkable meant recognizing value in things others dismissed as damaged or defective. She thought about all the animals that had found homes because of Orville's photograph, because one cat had refused to hide his scars. She thought about the safety detectors distributed through the fund bearing his name. She thought about Gerald reading to his grandchildren again, about Lily's increased confidence, about the community that had formed around one stubborn cat's insistence on being useful. "Beauty is permanent," she said, echoing a thought that had surfaced throughout their year together. Not perfection, permanence, showing up day after day, doing the work that matters even when nobody's watching. And Orville, who understood work in his bones, who'd never needed praise or recognition to validate his vigilance, simply continued his observation of the darkening street below. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and small victories. But tonight, they were home. They were safe. They were together. And the detector on the wall maintained its steady green light, a reminder that attention, persistence, and the refusal to ignore warning signs could save lives. That was the lesson. That was the gift. That was the legacy of 1 year with the ugliest cat, who had never been ugly at all, just honest about what he was and what he'd survived. And in learning to see him clearly, Eudora had learned to see herself clearly too. Not as someone past her prime, drifting through retirement, but as someone capable of important work. Not as someone alone, but as someone chosen. Not as someone broken by loss and age, but as someone still building, still learning, still becoming. The work would continue, tomorrow and the day after and the day after that. Simple work, quiet work, the kind of work that changed the world one small moment at a time. And that, Eudora had learned, was more than enough. It was everything. The end. Sometimes the most heroic thing we can do is pay attention. Sometimes beauty looks like a crumpled ear and a cloudy eye and a stubborn refusal to give up. Sometimes home is built not through grand gestures but through patient observation, consistent presence, and the courage to honor warnings that others dismiss. Orville didn't save Eudora's life in one dramatic moment. He saved it every day by teaching her to notice what mattered, to trust her instincts, and to recognize that being overlooked doesn't mean being worthless. This is a story about the power of vigilance, the value of imperfection, and the revolutionary act of showing up day after day exactly as you are.